Ashes of the Void. Chapter 1. The Silent Orbit of Betrayal. The first thing Kiernan Dale noticed was the silence, not the absence of sound. There was plenty of that. The low mechanical hum of the transport vessel, the distant rattle of chains, the occasional cough from another prisoner trying not to choke on recycled air. No, this silence was different. It was the kind that settled inside a person, hollowing them out, leaving nothing but the echo of what used to be. He stared at his reflection in the darkened viewport. The man looking back at him didn't resemble the heir to the Dale Shipping Guild. His uniform was gone, replaced by a gray restraint suit. His family crest, once worn with quiet pride, had been stripped away like it had never mattered. You'll crack if you keep looking like that. The speaker was older, lean, sharp-eyed despite the deep lines etched into his face. His restraints looked looser than they should have been, though Kiernan couldn't immediately tell why. "I'm not cracking," Kiernan said, his voice quieter than he expected. The man smirked faintly. "That's what they all say before Kharon IX finishes the job." Kiernan didn't respond. He turned back to the viewport, watching as hyperspace bled into the dull red glow of real space. A planet loomed ahead, scarred, fractured, surrounded by a thin halo of debris. Kharon IX, a prison with no exits and no appeals. His jaw tightened. It wasn't supposed to end like this. 3 weeks earlier, Kiernan had stood on the command deck of the Vanguard Crest, reviewing cargo manifests for what should have been a routine transfer. The shipment was unusual. High security clearance, minimal documentation, but not unprecedented. The Dale Guild had built its reputation on trust, and Kiernan had trusted too easily. The accusation came fast. Smuggling, illegal tech, breach of interstellar trade law. The evidence was airtight. Logs, signatures, routing data, all pointing directly at him. Too perfect. He tried to fight it, tried to explain, but the tribunal had already made its decision before he stepped into the room. And Darius Rhyse had stood in the back watching. Not intervening, not defending him, just watching. That was the moment Kiernan understood. Not during the sentencing, not when they stripped him of his name, but when Darius didn't even pretend to be surprised. "And who are you supposed to be?" Kiernan asked finally. Pulling himself back into the present, the older man tilted his head slightly. "Someone who's been here longer than you'd like to imagine." "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." Kiernan exhaled slowly. "Fine. Then answer this. Is there any way off that planet?" The man's eyes flickered, just for a second. "Off?" he repeated. "No." A pause. Before Kiernan could press further, the transport shuddered violently. A harsh alarm blared overhead. "Atmospheric entry," a synthetic voice announced. "Prepare for descent." Through the viewport, Kharon IX grew larger. Storms crawled across its surface like living things. Arcs of violet lightning tearing through clouds the color of dried blood. Massive industrial structures clung to the terrain. Mining rigs, processing towers, and something else. Something buried deeper. The ship punched through the atmosphere. Kiernan felt it in his bones. The landing was not gentle. The rear hatch slammed open and heat rushed in like a living force. Guards in armored exosuits herded the prisoners out, shock prods crackling with impatient energy. "Move!" Kiernan stepped onto the surface of Kharon IX. The ground felt wrong. Too light in one step, too heavy in the next. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably, forcing his body to constantly adjust. The air tasted metallic, thick with dust that clung to his throat. Above them, automated drones hovered, sleek, black, and armed. A prison, yes, but also something else. A system. Days blurred together. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. The labor was relentless. Prisoners were driven into deep mining shafts, where ancient structures lay buried beneath layers of rock and ash. The tools were crude, but the objectives were precise. They weren't just digging, they were uncovering something. Kiernan noticed it quickly. The shapes in the stone weren't natural. Smooth surfaces beneath jagged rock, faint geometric patterns, fragments of something engineered. "Oh, don't stare too long," a voice muttered beside him. Kiernan turned. It was the same older man from the transport. "You again," Kiernan said. "You say that like you had other options." Kiernan gestured subtly toward the exposed structure. "What is this?" The man studied him for a moment, as if weighing something. "Buried history," he said finally. "And the reason you're here," Kiernan frowned. "I'm here because I was framed." "Yes," the man said. "And why do you think that is?" Kiernan hesitated, but standing here, staring at something ancient and deliberate, it felt bigger. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They don't send people like you here by accident. Not anymore. People like me? Heirs, navigators, decision makers." A faint smile touched the man's lips. "People who can recognize patterns." Kiernan's pulse quickened. "You're saying this place isn't just a prison." "I'm saying," the man replied, straightening, "that Kharon IX is a lid." "A lid on what?" The man met his gaze fully now. "For now," he said, "that's the wrong question." Kiernan clenched his jaw. "Then what's the right one?" The man's expression shifted, something between amusement and approval. "The right question," he said quietly, "is whether you're willing to survive long enough to find out." A distant explosion echoed through the mine, followed by the sharp crack of a drone firing. The man stepped back, already blending into the line of prisoners. "Eron Kael," he added over his shoulder, "in case you earn the rest of the conversation." Kiernan stood there for a moment, staring at the place where he had been. Then he looked back at the buried structure. And for the first time since his sentencing, something stirred inside him that wasn't anger, not even grief. Something sharper. Purpose. He picked up his tool and went back to work. Not as a prisoner, but as someone who had just realized this wasn't the end of his story. Chapter 2. The Engine Beneath Ash. Time did not pass on Kharon IX. It accumulated, layer by layer, like the dust that settled into every crack of skin, every fold of fabric, every breath drawn through clenched teeth. Days had no meaning here, only cycles. Work cycles, rest cycles, survival cycles. Kiernan stopped counting after what he guessed was the first year. By then, he was no longer the man who had arrived in chains. Again, Kiernan exhaled sharply, tightening his grip on the fractured alloy rod in his hands. Across from him, Eron Kael stood with arms loosely folded, watching with an intensity that never seemed to fade. "This isn't combat training," Kiernan muttered. "No," Eron said calmly. "It's survival training. Combat is just a convenient side effect." Kiernan lunged. The strike was faster than it had been months ago. Clean, controlled. Eron sidestepped with minimal movement, tapping Kiernan's wrist just enough to redirect the blow. Kiernan pivoted, adjusted, and followed through. The rod stopped a breath from his shoulder. Eron raised an eyebrow. "Better." Kiernan lowered the weapon, breathing hard. "You could have blocked that." "Yes," Eron replied. "But then you wouldn't learn when not to hesitate." Kiernan gave a faint, humorless smile. "I've learned plenty about hesitation." Eron's gaze sharpened slightly. "And yet, you're still alive." That was true. Barely. At first. Then deliberately. Under Eron's guidance, Kiernan learned how to read the unstable gravity shifts, how to anticipate the drone patrol patterns, how to navigate the invisible hierarchies among the prisoners. But more than that, he learned how to think differently. "How long have you been here?" Kieran asked one cycle, as they rested in the shadow of a broken excavation rig. Eron didn't answer immediately. "Long enough to watch this place change," he said at last. "Change how?" Eron gestured toward the distant mining pits, where faint glimmers of smooth, metallic surfaces cut through the dust. Kiernan followed his gaze, looking for something specific. "Yes. And they found it?" Eron's lips curved slightly. "Pieces of it?" Kiernan turned to him. "You've seen more than pieces." Eron didn't deny it. The first time Eron showed him, Kiernan thought he was hallucinating. It was deep beneath the primary excavation zones, in a shaft long abandoned by the official mining crews. The descent alone was dangerous. Unstable gravity pockets, collapsing pathways, and blind zones where drones didn't patrol because they couldn't, or wouldn't. "Why isn't this area monitored?" Kiernan whispered as they moved through a narrow corridor of fractured stone. Eron's voice was quiet but certain. "Because they don't fully understand it." That was when Kiernan saw it. Not fragments, not ruins, a structure. Kiernan stepped closer, his breath catching. "This isn't dead," he said. "No," Eron replied. "It's dormant." Kiernan reached out, hesitating just before touching the surface. "What is it?" Eron watched him carefully. "A shipyard." Kiernan blinked. "This entire planet is a shell," Eron said. "A prison built on top of something far more valuable." "They tried," Eron said. "A long time ago. They couldn't control it." Kiernan frowned. "And you can." Eron didn't smile this time. "I can understand parts of it," he said. "Enough to know what it can do." "And what is that?" Eron stepped closer to the structure, placing his hand against the surface. The faint light intensified, spreading outward in delicate patterns. "It rewrites limitations," he said. "Energy, propulsion, data transfer. All of it. This isn't just advanced technology, Kiernan. It's superior design." Kiernan stared at the shifting light, something deep inside him igniting. "This is why I was sent here," he said quietly. Eron glanced at him. "Partly," Kiernan turned. "Partly." Eron's gaze held his. "You were sent here because you were inconvenient. This," he gestured to the structure, "is why no one leaves. The plan took years, not because it was impossible, because it had to be perfect. Kiernan and Aran worked in silence, in fragments, in stolen moments between labor cycles, mapping hidden pathways, testing responses from the alien systems, learning its logic, not as a machine, but as something closer to an ecosystem. It doesn't respond to commands." Kiernan said once, frustrated after another failed attempt. "Because it isn't waiting to be commanded," Aran replied. "It's waiting to be understood." Kiernan leaned back against the smooth surface. "That's not how technology works." Eron gave him a long look. "That's how this technology works." Slowly, painfully, Kiernan adapted. He stopped trying to force outcomes. He started listening. Patterns emerged. Responses became predictable. Interfaces revealed themselves not as screens or controls, but as shifts in light, changes in resonance. Until one day, "It's ready," Kiernan said. Eron studied the structure, then nodded faintly. "No," he said. "You are." The activation was silent. No alarms, no surge of power, just a subtle realignment of space within the chamber. The walls split, not mechanically, but fluidly, revealing something hidden beyond. A ship, sleek, angular, yet organic in its design. Its surface reflected no light, as if it absorbed the concept of visibility itself. Lines of soft luminescence traced its hull, shifting in response to Kiernan's presence. "The Aethel Guard," Eron said quietly. Kiernan stepped forward, awe cutting through years of hardened survival. "It's intact. It's waiting." Eron didn't move. Kiernan's expression tightened. "No. Kiernan, no," he repeated. I said I would help you escape, Eron interrupted gently. And I have. Kiernan shook his head. You can't stay here. Eron's gaze softened, but there was no hesitation in it. I won't survive the journey, he said. My body is already failing. Out there, I'd be dead in weeks. Then we find a way. Kiernan fell silent. Eron stepped closer. You have something I no longer do, he said. A future. Kiernan's jaw clenched. And a purpose, Eron added. Don't waste it chasing ghosts. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eron reached into his worn sleeve and pulled out a small data shard. Everything I've learned, he said. Interfaces, pathways, limitations, what little I understand. Kiernan took it slowly. This isn't about revenge, Eron said quietly. Not at first. Kiernan met his eyes. And later, Eron allowed himself a faint smile. Later, you'll decide what matters. The ascent was chaos. The Aethelguard didn't launch. It slipped. One moment it was within the buried chamber. The next, it existed somewhere slightly adjacent to it. Space folded, not violently, but efficiently. By the time the prison systems detected the anomaly, it was already too late. Kiernan stood on the bridge, hands hovering over controls that didn't exist in any conventional sense. The ship responded to intent, to thought patterns shaped by the training Eron had drilled into him. Above, the surface of Kharon IX fractured into view. Drones swarmed. Defense systems activated. The Aethelguard simply wasn't there anymore. It passed through their targeting systems like a shadow through light. Then, stars, open space, freedom. Kiernan didn't celebrate. He stood in silence, watching Kharon IX shrink behind him. A grave, a prison, a beginning. He closed his eyes briefly. Eron Kael was still down there, but his legacy wasn't. Kiernan opened his eyes again, gaze hardening. Set course, he murmured. The ship responded instantly, back toward the core systems, back toward the life that had been taken from him, back toward Darius Rhyse, and somewhere out there, Lyra. Chapter 3. The Weight of Return. Zenith Station shimmered like a crown suspended in the void, a convergence point for trade routes, power, and influence. It was the kind of place where fortunes were made quietly and destroyed even more quietly. Massive docking rings rotated in perfect synchronization, receiving ships from every major guild and corporation. At its center, the grand logistics gala unfolded in a blaze of light and calculated opulence. Kiernan Dale watched it all from the observation deck of a ship that technically did not exist. The Aethelguard hovered just outside regulated space, cloaked not by invisibility, but by irrelevance. Its presence simply refused to register in any system that tried to define it. Elegant, Kiernan murmured. Not the station. The plan. Years of preparation had led to this moment. Not a reckless strike, but a precise collapse. Below, Arthur Venn's ship drifted into its assigned berth. Kiernan allowed himself a small nod. Arthur had done exactly as instructed. Arthur Venn stood on the docking platform, trying not to look like a man who had just become the most envied and targeted independent shipping owner in the sector. The ship behind him gleamed with impossible subtlety, not flashy, not ostentatious, but wrong, in a way that seasoned operators could feel in their bones. You weren't kidding, one dock official muttered, scanning the vessel with growing confusion. This thing? It's not reading right. Arthur forced a casual shrug. New build, he said, private commission. The official frowned, but didn't press further. Zenith Station didn't thrive on questions. Arthur exhaled slowly. He still didn't understand why the mysterious benefactor had chosen him. The man had appeared without warning, offered him a ship beyond anything he could afford, and entrusted him with a cargo so valuable it could destabilize entire markets. And yet, there had been something familiar in his voice, something steady, honest. Arthur shook the thought away. Tonight wasn't about answers. It was about survival. Inside the gala hall, Darius Rhyse stood at the center of attention. He wore power like a second skin, tailored, effortless, absolute. Conversations bent around him. Deals paused until he acknowledged them. Entire sectors depended on his approval. At his side stood Lyra Sen, still, composed, perfect. Her movements were precise, her expressions measured. To anyone watching, she was the ideal executive assistant, efficient, calm, indispensable. But her eyes, a quiet absence. "Arthur Venn has arrived," she said smoothly, glancing at her internal display. "With a shipment." Darius's lips curved faintly. "Good," he said. "Right on time." Lyra inclined her head. "Shall I initiate acquisition protocols?" "Yes," Darius replied. "Let's not make this difficult for him." Lyra paused, just for a fraction of a second. Then, "Of course." Kiernan moved through the gala unseen, not invisible, just unrecognized. The null tech adapted to perception, subtly altering how others interpreted his presence. A passing guest, a minor investor, someone not worth remembering. He saw Darius immediately, and beside him, Kiernan stopped. Lyra, for a moment, the noise of the gala faded. She looked the same, and not the same at all. Her posture was too controlled, her gaze too distant. The warmth he remembered, the spark was buried under something cold and artificial. Kiernan's chest tightened. "Neural suppression," he whispered. The Aethel guard responded silently, feeding data into his interface. Confirmed. His hand clenched. Darius hadn't just taken her. He had rewritten her. Kiernan exhaled slowly, forcing the surge of emotion back into focus. Not yet. The disruption began subtly. A delay in docking clearance, a discrepancy in cargo verification. Then, a full stop. Arthur Venn stood in the docking control bay, trying to keep his voice steady. "There is no legal basis for this hold," he said. "There is now," the security officer replied flatly. "By order of Darius Rhyse." Arthur's stomach dropped. Right on schedule. Back in the gala hall, Darius raised a hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly, "it seems we have a matter of irregular trade." The room quieted. Arthur was escorted in, flanked by security. Darius smiled. "Arthur Venn," he said, "I was wondering how long you'd last without my support." Arthur met his gaze. "Long enough." A flicker of irritation crossed Darius' face. "Your new ship," Darius continued, "and its cargo, both unregistered. Highly suspicious. Or highly valuable." Arthur shot back. A ripple moved through the crowd. Darius's smile thinned. "I'm afraid I'll have to confiscate both." "On what authority?" "Mine." Silence. Then, the lights flickered. Every screen in the hall came alive at once. Data streams, security logs, encrypted files unraveling in real time. Then, footage. Clear, undeniable. Darius Rhyse, years earlier, overseeing the falsification of cargo records, fabricating evidence, signing off on Kiernan Dale's arrest. A collective gasp swept through the room. Darius froze. "That's impossible," he said sharply. But it wasn't over. More footage. Lyra, being restrained. A device implanted at the base of her skull. Her expression fading into the empty calm she wore now. The room turned. Darius's control, his carefully constructed empire, began to fracture. "Shut it down!" he snapped. "It's not connected to station systems!" Someone shouted back. Of course it wasn't. Kiernan stepped forward. This time the room noticed, not because the technology failed, because he let it. He walked through the parted crowd, each step deliberate. Darius stared at him. "Who are you?" Kiernan said nothing. He stopped a few feet away, then reached up and removed the mask. The silence that followed was absolute. Kiernan's voice was calm. "You should have made sure." Darius staggered back slightly. This is fabrication! A trick!" Kiernan didn't even look at him. His gaze was on Lyra. She was staring at him now. Not with recognition, but with confusion. Like something inside her was trying to surface. Kiernan stepped closer, slowly, giving her time to react. "It's okay," he said softly. He never finished. "Security forces, real ones this time. Closed in, weapons raised. Darius Rhyse," one of them said. "You are under arrest for corporate fraud, illegal coercion, and—" The rest blurred into noise. Kiernan was already reaching for the small device in his hand. Ira didn't move as he approached. Didn't resist. Didn't react. "Lyra," he said quietly. Her eyes flickered. He lifted the device, hesitating for the briefest moment, then activated it. A soft pulse. Invisible. Precise. Lyra gasped. Her body tensed, then staggered slightly, as if gravity had shifted beneath her. Memories surged back, unfiltered, overwhelming. Her breath hitched. Kiernan. The word was fragile, uncertain, but real. Kiernan caught her as she swayed. "I'm here," he said. Her hands gripped his jacket, grounding herself. "I thought," she started, voice breaking. "I know," he said gently. She looked up at him, really seeing him now. And then she pulled him into a fierce, desperate embrace. Kiernan held her tightly, years of distance collapsing into a single moment. "I didn't leave you," he murmured. "I know," she said, her voice trembling but steadying. "I know." Hours later, Zenith Station was still reeling. Darius Rhyse was gone, taken into custody, his empire already unraveling without him. Arthur Venn stood at the center of it all, suddenly elevated beyond anything he had imagined, and Kiernan Dale was nowhere to be found. The Aethelguard drifted far beyond the station's reach. On the bridge, Lyra stood beside him, watching the stars stretch endlessly ahead. "You're not going back," she said quietly. Kiernan shook his head. "There's nothing to go back to?" She studied him. "Then where are we going?" Kiernan glanced at her, a faint smile breaking through for the first time in years. "Somewhere new." Lyra took his hand, not as a shadow, not as a memory, but as herself. "Good," she said. And for the first time since Kharon IX, Kiernan Dale felt something unfamiliar. Not survival, not revenge, something lighter, something like peace. Thank you for listening. If you like this story, please subscribe for more.